Today, I'm going to show you how to make this butterfly plant stake. Hi, my name is Sarah. I am a stained glass artist and I like to teach people how to make stuff. For this project, I have a free pattern available that you can download from my website. The link is below in the description, or you can just go to sparklegarbage.com and look under the section for patterns. This is a pretty quick project. It should only take you an hour or two to make, and you can use pretty much any type of glass that you want for this. I will also say this project makes an excellent gift or a perfect piece of cute little home decor that you can keep for yourself. As for skill level for this project, I would say it is appropriate for beginners, but maybe very confident beginners because there are some deep curves within the pattern. Okay, so supplies you'll need for this project. You will need all of your basic stained glass supplies, which I do have a video listing all of those things and linking them. So if you are unsure what you'll need, you can go check out that video. The only additional thing you'll need is some kind of brass rod. This is a 12-inch long by 1/8 inch thick brass rod that I got off Amazon. I buy 10 packs of these for $7 or $8. They're cheap and they're pretty easy to work with. You can buy thicker ones if you like, but I found that these ones are plenty sturdy for this size plant stake. Some stained glass supply retailers also sell rods for plant stakes, but I find that they're more expensive and not really any easier to work with, so I just prefer these simple brass ones. And I have them linked below in the description so you can easily get them if you would like to try this project. Okay, so let me take you out to my workshop and we will go through the steps of making this project. So the first step of this project is printing out your pattern and picking out the glass you're going to use. I like picking a piece of glass that's transparent and a piece of glass that's opaque just for some contrast. And then you'll want to transfer your pattern onto your pieces of glass. You can either do it like this by tracing it, or cutting out your pattern pieces and tracing that onto your pieces of glass. If you're using a piece of textured glass like I am, you're going to want to trace onto the front side of the glass, but then cut from the smoother back side of the glass so your pattern pieces face the textured side up once you cut it out. If you're tracing your pieces onto a scrap piece like I am, you'll want to trace them in a way where you can easily cut them apart without breaking one of the other pattern pieces in the process. If you opt for cutting out your pattern and tracing it on that way, you'll want to carefully cut out whatever pieces are going on your opaque piece of glass. When I cut out printed patterns like this, I like to cut kind of in the middle of that black line just to get rid of a little bit of the thickness because the Sharpie will add that in the tracing process. And at this point, I decided to make the body of the butterfly out of this same clear glass, so I'm just going to trace that onto my scrap piece. Now I'm just going to finish cutting those butterfly wings apart and getting them ready to trace onto my pink glass. When I'm using a piece of glass that has this kind of wispy pattern on it, I like to look at the pattern and see where it looks interesting, and that's where I cut my pieces out on. And now you're just going to trace around your pattern pieces. When I trace like this, I like to use an ultra fine tip Sharpie just so it doesn't add a lot of bulk when I cut it out. If you use a Sharpie with a thicker tip, your lines are going to be thicker, and at least for me, I tend to cut on the outside of the line, which makes the pieces bigger than the pattern pieces, and then everything doesn't fit together as well as it would if you use a fine tip Sharpie. Once all your pattern pieces are transferred to your glass, we can start cutting it. Make sure you put your safety glasses on before you start cutting your glass. When I'm cutting pattern pieces off a larger sheet of glass like this, I like to cut it down first so I don't accidentally break some of those larger pieces of glass and I can use them in other projects. Next, I'll just go in and cut all the pattern pieces apart. Now I will go in and refine the shape and cut out right on that Sharpie line that we traced from our pattern pieces. The larger, straighter pieces, I'll use my running pliers to break them off, and I left a price tag on. And for the smaller pieces, I'll go through with my grosing pliers and get out the little curves and the little pieces that are too small for my running pliers. The more time you spend cleaning up your cut lines with your grosing pliers, the less time you'll have to spend at the grinder cleaning up the shape. And here you'll see me using two different sizes of grosing pliers. These ones are a little bit larger to grab some bigger pieces, and then the ones with the gray handles have really precise tips to get the little itty bitty pieces. And now let's cut out the rest of the pieces for the wings. And now we'll cut out the glass we're going to use as the background. The glass that I'm using is a clear iridized Florentine glass, and since the front side is heavily textured, I'm cutting this on the back side of the glass. When you get to cutting out the little side pieces, they do have kind of deep curves, so I like to cut them straight across and then go in and slowly carve out the curve. If you are unfamiliar with the type of glass you're using, or you're not confident cutting these deep curves, just leave them straight and then you can go in with your grinder and clean them up more precisely. Once all the pieces are cut out, it's time to take it over to the grinder. Usually, if I know that I'm going to be cutting out a pattern to trace it, I will print 2 copies and put one in a plastic sleeve like this, so while I'm grinding, I can lay the cleaned up pieces over the pattern to make sure everything is fitting correctly. And since I took so much time with my grosing pliers, these pieces don't really need a lot of grinding, so I'm just going to go around and make sure all the edges are smooth and don't have any sharp pieces or little bumps. When using your grinder, you're going to want to make sure you don't press too hard on your piece of glass against that grinder bit, because you could cut your fingertips. If you feel like your grinder bit isn't taking enough off fast enough, you might just want to replace your bit with a fresh one. You can also see that I'm wearing a little silicone finger covering because I tend to grind down my fingernail on that finger, and I'm just trying to protect it a little bit. I would say the most difficult part of this project is definitely cleaning up these little side pieces to make sure that they fit inside the pattern and that that curve is deep enough to accommodate for the butterfly wings. Once everything is ground down and you're happy with how all the pattern pieces are fitting, you're going to take it to the sink, wash off all that grinder dust, and it's time to foil. Before I start copper foiling my pieces, I wipe everything down with rubbing alcohol to make sure it's extra clean so the copper foil will adhere perfectly. For this project, I'm using 7/32 copper foil with a copper colored backing. If you're using a clear glass, you'll want to pay attention to what color your copper foil backing is. In this case, I know I'm going to patina it copper when it's finished, and because you'll be able to see the copper foil, I wanted everything to match. If you're using a clear glass and you don't plan on patinaing your piece, you're going to want to make sure you use silverback copper foils so it'll all look cohesive at the end. And now just go around and foil all of your pieces. Now this isn't a necessary step, but once I'm done foiling everything, I like to flip it so it's front side down and use masking tape to tape all the pieces together so it doesn't move around when I take it to be soldered. Before you start soldering, you're going to want to make sure you have a good layer of flux on your piece. I am also going to apologize now for how long this soldering process takes in this video. The tip of my soldering iron is really corroded, so it's not melting the solder as well as it should be. Typically when you solder, you'll want to tack together all of your pieces of glass before you go in and get your thick solder bead. When I have my pieces taped together like this, I think of it like icing a cake, where I go through with my kind of crumb coat of really uneven solder, and then I go through and clean it up and get that really nice, smooth solder bead. Typically, if this was a piece I was going to sell, I would use hobby came around the outside, but because this is for me, I'm just going to put a bead around the edge. And now we're just going to flip it over and repeat the soldering on the back side of this piece. And now it's time to prepare our brass rod for soldering. I like to measure how much is going to be on the piece and then add flux. The solder won't stick to the brass rod unless it's heated up a little bit, so I like to get a bead of solder on the tip of my soldering iron and then hold it against the brass rod until the solder flows against it. This will take a couple seconds. And once the solder starts flowing, I just kind of like to rub it all over and get the tip of the brass rod tinned, so when I go to attach it to my stained glass piece, it will adhere more easily. At this point in the process, my stained glass piece and my brass rod are both really hot, so I'm going to let them sit and cool down for about 10 minutes before I attach everything to make sure I don't get any heat cracks on my plant stake. To attach the brass rod to your stained glass piece, pick up a bead of solder and set the brass rod against that line that is built into the pattern to support the piece. The way I like to do this is pick up a really big bead of solder and then hold it on the top of the brass rod until it flows down and connects that brass rod to that solder line. I'll do this a couple times down the length of the brass rod just to make sure I have enough solder to cover the gap between the brass rod and the glass. Here you can see those beads filling in that space. And now I'm going to take my soldering iron and just kind of smooth out the sides of those beads so it looks nice and clean and neat. The last step in the soldering process is to go around the edge and clean up any drips and make sure all that copper foil is covered. I find this easier to do with the brass rod attached so you have something to hold on to that's not heating up as quickly. And if you get any little bumps or drips on the front, you can just go through and clean those up as well. So this is another step that's not completely necessary, but I like to go in with a damp magic eraser and scrub my solder lines to make sure they're extra clean. I'm doing this because I'm going to patina my piece copper, and copper patina is really temperamental, and you're not going to get a good shiny finish unless your piece is as clean as it can possibly be. This step will also cut down on how much polishing you have to do to finish your piece off because your solder lines are already clean, and so there's less oxidation to buff off at the end. When using patina, you're going to want to make sure you have something protecting your surface because this stuff is kind of nasty. I also wear gloves because this is a poisonous acid and I don't want it getting on my skin or into any cuts I might have on my hand. For copper patina, I also use a toothbrush to apply it to really scrub it onto those solder lines. I like to use the cap of my bottle to hold my patina, and then I dip my toothbrush in and scrub it onto my solder lines, making sure to get the front and the back and the sides. Once I'm done, I dump out the extra patina onto my paper towel, wipe off any excess, and clean up my workspace. For the very last step in this project, we are going to polish our piece. I take a little bit of my polish and pour it onto the corner of my rag and then wipe it all over my piece. We are then going to let it dry for a few minutes and then come back and buff off all of that polish. How our finished piece turned out. I hope you enjoyed this video and give this project a try. If you do, please tag me in your photos. I would love to see what you guys make. As always, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. I do my best to respond to everything. If you want to see more stained glass videos or just videos from me, feel free to subscribe to my channel. And until next time, bye!